The leather seat in first class felt more foreign than familiar after 18 months away. I stared through the cabin window as Singapore's skyline disappeared into a bank of clouds. The city where I'd spent the last year and a half restructuring our Southeast Asian operations shrinking to nothing. Zoe Mercer. That was still my name, though I'd used only my maiden name, Zoe Brenner, in most professional contexts overseas. The dual identity had been useful. Necessary, even. My phone buzzed with the captain's announcement about our descent into Seattle. 14 hours in the air and I'd barely slept, not from turbulence or discomfort, but from the persistent hum of unfinished business that had followed me across the Pacific. The quarterly reports I'd been reviewing told a story that didn't quite align with the narrative my husband had been feeding me during our weekly video calls. Revenue was up. Operating costs were also up, but in departments that should have been streamlined. Months ago, the discrepancies were small enough to ignore if you wanted to ignore them. I didn't want to ignore them. Terrence hadn't known I was coming home early. I'd kept the decision private, made the arrangements myself, and informed only my executive assistant in Singapore, a woman who understood the value of discretion. The official story was that I'd be returning next week, after the board meeting I was supposedly attending in Hong Kong. The truth was simpler. I wanted to see how things actually functioned when no one knew I was watching. Continental Logistics Corporation wasn't just where I worked. It was what I'd built piece by piece from the regional freight company my father had left me when he died 15 years ago. I'd been 28 then, newly married, and suddenly responsible for 300 employees and a network that spanned the West Coast. Terrence had been supportive in those early years, encouraging even. He'd come from a banking background, understood numbers and leverage, and had helped me navigate the first major expansion, but somewhere along the way, support had shifted into something else. Management, control, a quiet assumption that his expertise mattered more than my instinct. The last 18 months had been his idea. "Let me handle things here," he'd said, his hand on my shoulder, in that way that was both reassuring and dismissive. "You're brilliant at operations. Go fix Singapore, restructure the whole Pacific division, and I'll keep the home office running smoothly. We're a team." A team. I'd believed that once. The plane touched down at SeaTac just after 6 a.m, local time. I'd deliberately booked the early arrival, knowing that most of the executive team wouldn't be in the office until 9. The headquarters building, a gleaming 15-story structure in downtown Seattle, opened at 7 for early shift operations staff. I could be there by 7:30, invisible, observational. I collected my single carry-on bag and declined the driver my assistant had arranged. Instead, I took a rideshare, giving the address of a hotel 3 blocks from the office. The driver didn't speak much, which suited me. I watched the familiar streets slide past, the city I'd left behind looking somehow both unchanged and completely different. By 7:15, I was walking through the lobby doors of Continental Logistics Corporation. The space was exactly as I remembered it. Soaring ceilings, polished marble floors, the company logo displayed in brushed steel behind the reception desk. But the energy felt off. The security guard who should have recognized me didn't even look up from his phone. The reception desk was unmanned, though I could hear voices from the break room nearby. Laughter, casual conversation at a volume that suggested no one was worried about being overheard. I stood in the center of the lobby, feeling oddly invisible in my own building. That's when I heard her. "I don't care what the policy says. Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea who you're talking to?" The voice came from the corridor that led to the visitor management office, a sharp carrying tone that ricocheted off the marble and glass. I turned and saw a young woman, mid-20s, blonde hair pulled into a severe ponytail, designer suit that probably cost more than most of our junior staff made in a month. She was pointing at someone I couldn't see, her finger jabbing the air like a weapon. "You think you can tell me I need an appointment?" she continued, her voice rising. "I'm engaged to Terrence Mercer, the CEO. Your boss's boss's boss. So unless you want to be looking for a new job by lunch, you'll get me up to his office right now." My breath caught. Engaged. The word sat in my chest like broken glass. I moved closer, my footsteps silent on the marble. The young woman was facing a security desk, where a middle-aged man in a continental uniform sat with the patient, exhausted expression of someone who'd had this conversation before. Behind her, a small crowd had gathered. 2 employees waiting to check in, a delivery person with a cart of packages, and a client I vaguely recognized from the law firm we contracted for regulatory compliance. "Ma'am," the security guard said, his voice carefully neutral, "I understand who you are, but without Mr. Mercer's direct authorization—" "Without his authorization?" She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "I don't need his authorization. I'm going to be his wife. That means this company is going to be mine too. So you can either let me through or you can explain to Terrence why you disrespected his fiancé." The guard's jaw tightened. "I'll call up to his office." "You'll do what I tell you to do," she snapped. Then she turned to the small crowd behind her, performing for them now. "This is what I have to deal with. The incompetence, the disrespect. When I'm Mrs. Mercer, things are going to change around here. A lot of dead weight is going to be cut." One of the employees, a young woman from our logistics coordination team, whose name I couldn't quite remember, took a small step backward. The delivery person kept his eyes on his cart. The lawyer, a partner I thought, someone who'd worked with us for years, stood very still, his expression carefully blank. Something cold and sharp settled in my chest. This wasn't surprise. It wasn't even shock. It was recognition. I stepped forward. "Excuse me." The blonde woman turned, her expression already preparing for another confrontation. Then she looked at me, really looked, and her face went through a rapid sequence of calculations. She didn't know who I was. My 18 months away, the fact that I'd always maintained a relatively low public profile, the way Terrence had increasingly positioned himself as the face of the company, all of it had made me a stranger in my own building. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone dismissive. "I'm wondering if you could clarify something," I said, keeping my voice calm. Professional. "You said you're engaged to Terrence Mercer?" Her chin lifted. "That's right. Who's asking?" "I'm asking because I'm curious about the timeline." I felt the attention of everyone in the lobby shift to me, felt the quality of the silence change. "When exactly did this engagement happen?" "Not that it's any of your business," she said, her eyes narrowing, "but Terrence proposed 3 months ago. We've been together for over a year." The math was simple, brutal. I'd been in Singapore for 18 months. They'd been together for over a year. "I see," I said softly. "And you are?" "Kelsey Sterling." She said it like I should have known, like the name carried weight. "I'm the director of client relations for our Pacific Northwest division. Not that I need to explain myself to you." Director of client relations. A position that hadn't existed when I left, a position that would have required board approval to create, which meant either the board had approved it without telling me or, "And you feel that your engagement gives you special privileges here," I said, still calm, still quiet, "including the authority to threaten employees and disrespect security protocols." Her expression hardened. "I feel that my relationship with the CEO means I don't have to follow the same rules as random people who wander in off the street. And I definitely don't have to justify myself to some—" She looked me up and down, taking in my travel-wrinkled clothes, my lack of makeup, the exhaustion I knew showed on my face. "Some nobody." The lawyer behind her made a small sound. The security guard's eyes had gone wide. "You should probably stop talking," I said, still in that same quiet voice. "Excuse me." Kelsey's face flushed. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you advice, free of charge." She pulled out her phone, her movements sharp and deliberate. "You know what? I'm recording this, because when Terrence hears how you spoke to me, how you tried to intimidate me in his own building, you're going to regret ever opening your mouth." She held up the phone, pointed it at me like a weapon. I could see the red recording indicator clearly. "Please state your name." she said, her voice taking on a formal quality. For the record. I met her eyes, held her gaze, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of crystalline clarity. A recognition that whatever came next, whatever was about to unfold, I was done protecting Terrence from the consequences of his choices. Zoe Mercer, I said clearly. Majority shareholder and board chair of Continental Logistics Corporation. The phone in Kelsey's hand wavered. Her face went from flushed to pale in the space of a heartbeat. Behind her, I heard someone inhale sharply. And for the record, I continued, my voice never rising above conversational, I'm also Terrence, Mercer's wife. Though based on what you've just told me, it seems that particular detail might have slipped his mind. Kelsey's mouth opened, closed. She looked at the phone in her hand, then back at me, the full weight of what she'd recorded finally registering. She started. You should probably stop recording now, I said. She fumbled with the phone, her hands suddenly clumsy. The recording light went dark. The lobby had gone completely silent, every person frozen in their small crisis of social calculation. Should they intervene? Retreat? Pretend they hadn't witnessed this? I turned to the security guard, who looked like he was trying to decide whether to call someone or simply sink into the floor. What is your name? I asked. Maurice, ma'am. Maurice Atwood. Maurice, I apologize for putting you in this position. You were following protocol correctly. I should have identified myself when I came in. I glanced at Kelsey, who still stood there, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. And I'd appreciate it if you could call up to my husband's office and let him know I'm here. Tell him I'll be waiting in the main conference room. Yes, ma'am, right away. I looked at Kelsey one more time. Up close, I could see how young she really was, how carefully constructed her armor of designer clothes and aggressive confidence actually was. For a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. You can join us if you'd like, I said, since you're so invested in Continental's future. Then I walked past her toward the elevators, my carry-on bag rolling smoothly behind me. I could feel every eye in that lobby on my back, could already imagine the texts being sent, the whispered conversation starting. The video Kelsey had recorded would be on someone's social media within the hour, I was certain. Probably framed as, what? Corporate drama? Rich people problems? It didn't matter. Let them post it. Let them share it. Let the whole world see exactly who Kelsey Sterling was and exactly what she thought she was entitled to. The elevator arrived with a soft chime. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the 14th floor where the executive offices were located, and watched the lobby disappear as the doors closed. My hands were shaking. Just a tremor, but enough to notice. I pressed them flat against my thighs and counted my breaths. In, out, 18 months. They'd been together for over a year. The elevator opened onto a floor I'd designed myself. Open plan workstations for the operations managers, private offices along the windows for the C-suite executives, and at the far end, the corner office that had been mine before I left. That was supposed to still be mine. The space was different. Subtle changes, but changes nonetheless. The color scheme had shifted from the cool blues and grays I'd chosen to warmer earth tones. The art on the walls, pieces I'd selected from local artists, had been replaced with generic corporate abstracts, and the energy was different too, more casual, less focused. A few early arrivals looked up as I passed, their expressions moving through confusion to recognition to something like horror. I nodded at them, offered a small smile that I knew didn't reach my eyes, and kept moving. The main conference room was at the center of the floor, glass-walled, visible from every desk. I wheeled my bag inside, closed the door, and took a seat at the head of the long table, the same place I'd always sat during executive meetings. The chair felt foreign now, like trying on clothes that no longer fit quite right. Through the glass, I watched the floor slowly wake up. More employees arriving, coffee being poured, computers being turned on, and then gradually, the awareness spreading like ripples in water. Heads turning toward the conference room, voices drop into whispers, Phone's coming out. I checked my own phone. Nothing from Terrence yet, though Maurice must have called by now. I opened my email and started scrolling through the last 18 months of corporate communications. Message after message from Terrence, keeping me updated on operations, asking for my input on decisions, signing off with variations of miss you and can't wait until you're home. I'd believed every word. No, that wasn't quite right. I'd wanted to believe every word. There was a difference. The glass door opened. I looked up, expecting Terrence. Instead, it was Kelsey Sterling. She'd composed herself since the lobby confrontation, reapplied her lipstick, straightened her suit. But her eyes were harder now, the panic replaced by something more calculating. "We need to talk," she said, closing the door behind her. I leaned back in my chair. "Do we?" "That video," she started. "The one you recorded without my consent?" I asked. "The one where you threatened employees, claimed special privileges based on your relationship with my husband, and called me a nobody? I didn't know who you were." "Does that make it better or worse?" She moved closer to the table, her movements controlled, deliberate. "Look, I understand this is awkward." "Awkward," I repeated. The word felt absurd in my mouth. "But there are ways to handle this that don't have to be destructive." She pulled out her phone again, but this time she held it so I could see the screen. "The video's already circulating. It's on 3 different platforms. The narrative is already being shaped." I looked at the screen. A clip of our confrontation, edited to start with my words, "You should probably stop talking," and Kelsey's response about recording. The caption read, "Corporate exec threatens employee for relationship with boss, caught on camera." The comments were already piling up, dozens of them, hundreds, growing by the second, each one more venomous than the last. Rich people protecting their territory. This is what privilege looks like. The way she talks to her is disgusting. The blonde girl was just defending herself. I handed the phone back to Kelsey. Interesting narrative. It's not a narrative. It's what happened. She sat down across from me, uninvited. "You came in aggressive. You threatened me. You used your position to intimidate. That's all on camera. Edited camera. A camera nonetheless." She folded her hands on the table. "Here's what I'm thinking. This can go one of 2 ways. Either we find a way to work together, you, me, and Terrence, and we put out a joint statement about how this was all a misunderstanding, or this video goes more viral than you can possibly imagine. And in today's social media environment, public perception is everything." I studied her. The careful way she held herself. The practiced quality of her speech. This wasn't panic. This was strategy. "You've done this before," I said. "Done what?" "Created narratives. Position yourself as the victim. Used public pressure to get what you want." Her expression didn't change. "I'm just pointing out reality. You assaulted me verbally in front of witnesses. I have proof. And the court of public opinion tends to side with the younger woman against the older, wealthier, more powerful one." "I'm 36, I said quietly. "And I'm 26, which means in optics terms, you're the established power, and I'm the underdog." She leaned forward. "So here's what I'm proposing. You issue a public apology. Something gracious about how you were surprised by my relationship with Terrence. You reacted poorly. You regret any harm caused. We position this as a private family matter that got out of hand, and in exchange, I don't push this further. I don't do interviews. I don't expand the story. And what about your engagement to my husband? That's between you and Terrence. I'm just trying to protect my career and my reputation." The door opened again. This time, it was Terrence. He looked exactly as he had on our video. Call's tall, broad-shouldered, his dark hair graying at the temples in that way that made him look distinguished rather than old. His suit was impeccable. His expression was carefully controlled shock. "Zoe," he said, "I didn't know you were coming home early." Clearly. He glanced at Kelsey, then back at me. I watched him calculate. watched him decide which version of this moment he was going to play. "Can we talk privately?" he asked. "I think Kelsey has a right to be here," I said, "since she's so invested in the company's future." Kelsey stood. "Actually, I should go. Let you two talk. But Zoe," she looked at me directly, "think about what I said. The optics matter." She left, pulling the door closed behind her with a soft click. Terrence stood there for a moment, his hand still on the briefcase he carried. Then he set it down, pulled out a chair, and sat. "How much did you hear?" he asked. "Enough." "It's not what it looks like." I almost laughed. The cliche of it, the utter predictability. "What does it look like, Terrence?" She's complicated. She came on strong when I hired her, and I should have set better boundaries, but... "You hired her?" He stopped. "I hired several people while you were gone. The company needed... You created a director position for client relations, a position that didn't exist before, and you gave it to your girlfriend." "She's not my girlfriend." "She says you're engaged." "She says a lot of things." He rubbed his face, and for the first time I saw genuine exhaustion there. "Look, I made mistakes. I got lonely. I got comfortable with someone who paid attention to me, and I let things go too far. But I never proposed to her. I never intended to marry her. She's become fixated." "Fixated," I repeated. "Obsessed, maybe. I've tried to end it several times, but she threatens to make scenes, to go public, to damage the company. And with you gone, with you trusting me to handle everything here..." He stopped, started again. "I handled it badly." I looked at him. Really looked. Tried to see past the careful presentation to whatever truth might be underneath. "The quarterly reports," I said. "Operating costs are up in client relations. Significantly." He didn't respond immediately, and in that pause I saw it. The calculation. The decision to tell me a version of the truth that served him best. "Kelsey has expensive tastes," he said finally. "And I was trying to keep her happy while I figured out how to extricate myself. It was stupid. I know it was stupid." "How much?" "What?" "How much money, Terrence? How much has gone into keeping her happy?" He stood, went to the window, looked out over the city. "Maybe $500,000 over the course of the year. Travel budgets, conference attendance, consulting fees. $500,000, which I can account for. It's all documented, and I can fix it. I can make it right." I stood too, walked to the window, stood beside him looking out at the same view. Downtown Seattle spread below us, Puget Sound glittering in the distance. "Do you love her?" I asked. "No." "Did you ever?" "I don't know. Maybe I convinced myself I did for a while, but it wasn't real. It was just..." He turned to face me. "I missed you. I missed having you here. And she was here, and she was interested, and it was easy." "Easy," I said. The word tasted like ash. "I'm not making excuses. I'm telling you what happened. And I'm telling you I want to fix it." He reached for my hand. I let him take it, felt the familiar warmth of his palm against mine. "Come home, really home, not to some hotel. Come home to our house, and let me show you that what we have is real. Let me prove that this was just a mistake, a terrible mistake, but not the end of us." I looked down at our joined hands, remembered all the times I'd held this hand before, all the times I'd believed in the promise it represented. "The video," I said. "The one Kelsey recorded. It's already viral. I know, I've seen it." His grip tightened. "We'll handle it. Together. We'll put out a statement, clarify what really happened, make sure everyone knows the truth." "And what is the truth, Terrence?" "That you're my wife. That you've been away building something incredible for this company. That you came home to find a situation that looked worse than it was, and you reacted like any person would. That Kelsey deliberately provoked you and recorded it for leverage. It was a good story, clean, almost believable." "I need to think," I said. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He brought my hand to his lips, kissed my knuckles. "But think at home, Zoe. Not in some hotel. Come home. I pulled my hand back, gently but firmly. I'll let you know. Something flickered across his face. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration, but he masked it quickly. Okay, I understand. This is a lot to process. He picked up his briefcase. I have a meeting at 9, but I'll clear my afternoon. We can talk more then. Really talk. He moved toward the door, then stopped. The board meeting next week, the one in Hong Kong. You're still planning to attend remotely? Why? Just checking. I know we have some important votes coming up. Strategic decisions that need your input. I nodded slowly. I'll be there. Good, that's good. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I really am sorry, Zoe, for all of it. Then he was gone, and I was alone in the conference room with the city spread below me and the growing awareness that nothing he'd said was completely true. I pulled out my phone and opened my personal email. Found the message from my executive assistant in Singapore, the one I'd sent her last week when I'd first noticed the discrepancies in the quarterly reports. Her response was there, sent while I'd been in flight. Requested forensic audit completed. Sending encrypted files to your personal device. Recommend review before confronting any parties. Patterns suggest coordinated effort. I downloaded the files. They were large, hundreds of pages of financial documentation, transaction records, shell company formations. I opened the summary document and started reading. $500,000. That's what Terrence had told me. That's what he wanted me to believe. The forensic audit told a different story. Over the course of 18 months, approximately $3.2 million had been routed through the client relations department into a network of consulting firms and service providers. On paper, everything looked legitimate. Contracts, deliverables, payment schedules. But when my assistant had dug deeper, following the chain of ownership through the shell companies, a pattern had emerged. Every single one of those consulting firms ultimately traced back to a holding company registered in Delaware. And that holding company had 2 listed principals, Kelsey Sterling and Terrence Mercer. They weren't just having an affair. They were embezzling. I closed the file and looked out at the city again. Felt the information settle into my bones, changing the shape of everything I thought I knew. Terrence hadn't gotten lonely. He'd gotten greedy. And Kelsey wasn't some obsessed girlfriend he was trying to escape. She was a partner, a co-conspirator. The video they'd created, her confrontation, my response, the careful editing that made me look aggressive and her sympathetic, it wasn't spontaneous. It was preparation, insurance, a way to discredit me if I started asking too many questions. My phone buzzed, a text from Terrence. Media outlets are requesting comment on the video. I'm holding them off, but we need to decide on our response soon. Can we talk at noon? I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new text to my attorney, a woman named Rosalie Huxley, who'd handled my father's estate and had been my personal counsel for 15 years. Someone I trusted absolutely. Need to meet. Today, if possible. Urgent corporate and personal matter. Her response came within minutes. My office, 3 p.m. We'll clear the afternoon. I gathered my bag, left the conference room, and walked back toward the elevators. The floor was fully awake now, dozens of employees at their desks, all of them carefully not looking at me while simultaneously tracking my every move. As I waited for the elevator, my phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from a social media platform I rarely used. Someone had tagged me in a post. I opened it. The video had been reposted by a business news aggregator with a new caption. Continental Logistics CEO's wife caught on camera verbally assaulting employee. Company insiders say marriage has been troubled for years. Full story developing. The comments had multiplied. Thousands of them now. Each one feeding the narrative that I was a rich, entitled bully who couldn't handle the reality of her husband moving on. She looks exhausted and mean. The younger woman was professional, and she just attacked her. This is what happens when you marry for money, not love. Hope she gets sued for harassment. I closed the apps, The elevator arrived. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. The same lobby where this had started less than an hour ago. The same marble floors, the same soaring ceilings. But now it felt like hostile territory. Every person I passed looked at me with some combination of curiosity, judgment, or carefully practiced neutrality. Maurice, the security guard, caught my eye as I headed toward the exit. He gave me a small nod, solidarity maybe, or just acknowledgement. I nodded back and stepped out into the morning air. The city was waking up fully now. Traffic building, people hurrying to work. The ordinary rhythm of an ordinary day while my entire world restructured itself around a single clarifying truth. My husband had spent 18 months stealing from me, while sleeping with a woman young enough to be his daughter. And when I discovered it, they'd turned it into a weapon to use against me. I walked the 3 blocks to my hotel, checked in, went up to my room, and finally allowed myself to sit down on the bed and feel the full weight of it. But I didn't cry. Couldn't cry. The place where tears should have been was filled with something else, something colder, sharper, information, leverage, power. I had the forensic audit. I had 18 months of financial records. I had the knowledge that they'd created this elaborate scheme and then tried to frame me as the villain when I'd stumbled onto the truth. What I didn't have yet was a strategy. That's what I needed Rosalie for. I set an alarm for 2:30, lay back on the bed, and closed my eyes. Not to sleep, but to think, to plan, to prepare for the afternoon meeting that would determine exactly how far I was willing to go to protect what was mine. The anger I'd felt in the lobby, that moment of crystalline clarity, hadn't faded. If anything, it had sharpened, focused itself into something more useful than rage, recognition. I recognize now what I'd been refusing to see for months, maybe years. The subtle ways Terrence had positioned himself as the real leader of Continental while I was just the majority shareholder. The way he'd encouraged me to go to Singapore to spend 18 months away, to trust him with day-to-day operations, the way he'd isolated me. And I recognized something else too. I'd let him do it. I'd been complicit in my own erasure. I'd told myself it was partnership, delegation, trust. I'd told myself that a good wife supported her husband's ambitions, that sharing power was the same as sharing a life. I'd been wrong. The alarm on my phone chimed at 2:30. I stood, washed my face, changed into fresh clothes from my carry-on. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror was someone I barely recognized, older than I remembered, harder around the edges, but also more present, more real. I arrived at Rosalie's office at exactly 3 o'clock. Her firm occupied the top 3 floors of a building in Pioneer Square, all exposed brick and industrial windows. The receptionist recognized me immediately, smiled with genuine warmth, and walked me back to Rosalie's corner office herself. Rosalie was in her early 60s, silver hair cut in a sharp bob, glasses that somehow made her look more formidable, rather than less. She stood when I entered, came around her desk, and pulled me into a brief, fierce hug. "I've been watching the news," she said. "Figured you'd call. It's worse than the news knows." "It usually is. Sit. Tell me everything." I sat, and I told her. Not just about this morning, but about all of it. The 18 months in Singapore, the gradual shift in Terrence's communications, the quarterly reports that didn't quite add up, the forensic audit my assistant had run, the $3.2 million in embezzled funds, the shell companies, the partnership between Kelsey and Terrence. Rosalie listened without interrupting, taking notes in her precise, practiced hand. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me. "The video," she said. "Let me see it." I pulled it up on my phone, handed it over, watched her watch it, her expression never changing. When it finished, she watched it again, then a third time. "They set you up," she said finally. "This was planned. She knew exactly what she was doing when she provoked you. She knew you'd respond, and she knew how to edit it to make you look like the aggressor. I know. And you want to know your options. I want to know how to destroy them." Rosalie's eyebrows rose slightly. Destroy is a strong word. It's the right word. She leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. Okay, let's talk about what destruction looks like in this context. You have 3 primary avenues: legal, financial, and reputational. Each has different timelines and different collateral damage. Walk me through them. Legal first. With the forensic audit, you have clear evidence of embezzlement. You can file criminal charges against both Terrence and Kelsey. The DA would almost certainly prosecute. The amount is substantial, the evidence is documented, and the fact that Terrence was in a position of fiduciary responsibility makes it worse. They'd be looking at significant prison time if convicted. But criminal prosecution is slow. It could take a year or more to go to trial, and in the meantime, the media narrative continues. They'll position themselves as the victims of a vindictive wife trying to punish her husband for an affair. The fact that you're the majority shareholder and the one bringing charges would feed into that story. I nodded. What else? Financial. You can remove Terrence as CEO immediately. As board chair and majority shareholder, you have that authority. You can freeze the accounts associated with the client relations department, claw back the embezzled funds through civil litigation, and restructure the company to eliminate positions that were created for improper purposes. Timeline? Immediate for the removal and freezing. Weeks to months for the clawback, depending on how cooperative they are. But again, this plays into the narrative they're building. Scorned wife fires husband, destroys young woman's career. You'll be positioned as the villain using your power to exact revenge. And reputational? Rosalie smiled. It wasn't a warm expression. That's where it gets interesting. The video they released is already shaping public perception against you, but you have something they don't expect, which is the truth. Documented, verifiable, incontrovertible truth. She pulled out a legal pad, started sketching a timeline. Here's what I'm thinking. They've started a media war. They think they control the narrative because they fired the first shot. But they don't know you have the audit. They don't know you know about the shell companies. They think you're operating from a position of wounded pride, not documented evidence. So we use that. We do, but carefully. Because once you deploy this information, there's no taking it back. You need to be absolutely certain you want to go this route. I thought about the lobby that morning, about Kelsey's smug smile when she'd shown me the edited video, about Terrence's careful lie about $500,000 when the real number was more than 6 times that. I'm certain, I said. Rosalie nodded. Then here's the strategy. Tomorrow before the business day starts, you file for immediate separation as CEO and board chair. You cite irreconcilable operational differences and invoke the emergency powers clause in the corporate bylaws. That freezes Terrence out of all decision-making authority and financial access pending a board review. The board will back you. I've already made some calls. They've seen the video, they know it looks bad, but they also know you're the majority shareholder and the one who built this company. When you present them with the forensic audit, they'll support whatever action you recommend. What about Kelsey? Her position is eliminated as part of the restructuring. No cause needs to be given. It's a corporate decision. But you also file a civil suit against both her and Terrence for the embezzled funds, naming the shell companies and detailing the scheme. That becomes public record. And the media? That's where we get creative. You don't just respond to their narrative. You preempt it. You hold a press conference. You present the evidence. You let the facts speak for themselves. Rosalie leaned forward. But Zoe, you need to understand something. Once you do this, you can't be the victim anymore. You have to be willing to be seen as the one who brought everything down. Some people will applaud you. Others will still think you're a vindictive wife. You have to be okay with not everyone being on your side. I thought about that. About the comments I'd read on the video, about the way people would talk about this for months, maybe years, the way I'd be reduced to a headline, a cautionary tale, a role in someone else's narrative about power and betrayal. I'm okay with it, I said. Are you? Really? Because there's another option, which is quiet separation. You file for divorce, you settle financially, you remove Terrence from the company through a negotiated exit package. Kelsey's position is eliminated, but she gets severance. The embezzled funds get repaid over time as part of the settlement. Everything stays private. The video eventually fades. Life continues. And they get away with it. They get away with the public embarrassment, yes. But they don't get away with the money, and they don't get away with their jobs. It's punishment. Just not public. Punishment. I stood, walked to Rosalie's window, looked out at the city, the same view I'd had from the Continental building, just from a different angle. If I go quiet, I said slowly, they win the narrative. The video stays as the definitive story. I become the villain in my own life. And the next time someone Googles my name, that's what they'll find. An out-of-context clip of me looking cruel and unstable. Probably yes. And if I go public, you control the narrative, you present the evidence, you let people decide for themselves who the real villain is, but you also have to live with being a public figure in a public scandal. Privacy ends. I turned back to face her. How fast can we move? Board meeting can be convened tomorrow morning. Press conference can be scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Lawsuits can be filed simultaneously. Do it. Rosalie studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. Okay. I'll need the forensic audit files, everything you have. I forwarded them from my phone to her secure email. What else? Go back to your hotel. Order room service. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be the hardest day of your life. She paused. And Zoe, when you get up on that stage tomorrow and tell your story, remember that the people watching aren't your friends or your enemies. They're just people. Some will believe you, some won't. The only thing you can control is whether you tell the truth. I know. Good. She walked me to the door. One more thing. Terrence is going to call you tonight. He's going to try to negotiate. He's going to offer you things, apologies, explanations, promises. Don't engage. Don't give him any indication of what's coming. What if he threatens me? With what? He's the one who committed fraud. The worst he can do is try to embarrass you, and he's already done that with the video. No, he's going to try to appeal to your emotions, your history together, the life you built. He's going to try to make. You doubt whether you really want to do this. I won't doubt. Then you'll be fine. I left Rosalie's office as the sun was starting to set over the city. The sky was turning that particular shade of Pacific Northwest gray gold, the light diffuse and melancholy. I walked back to my hotel slowly, taking in the familiar streets, the familiar faces of strangers. Tomorrow everything would change. The company I'd built, the marriage I'd believed in, the careful privacy I'd maintained, all of it would become public. Examined, judged, I should have felt afraid. Instead, I felt calm. My phone rang as I entered the hotel lobby. Terrence, I let it go to voicemail. It rang again. I declined the call. A text came through. Zoe, please, we need to talk. I know you're angry, but we can fix this. Just talk to me. I blocked his number. Another text, this time from an unknown number. This is Kelsey. I know you're upset, but the video isn't what you think. Let me explain. I blocked. That number too. In my hotel room, I ordered the room service Rosalie had suggested. Salmon, roasted vegetables, a glass of wine I barely touched. I ate mechanically, fueling my body without really tasting anything. Then I opened my laptop and started drafting my statement for the press conference. It took me 3 hours to write, not because the words were hard to find, but because I kept second-guessing myself, wondering if I was being too harsh, too personal, too emotional. Then I'd remember Kelsey's face in the lobby, the calculated cruelty of her performance, the way she'd weaponize my own building against me, and I'd keep writing. By midnight, I had something I could work with, a statement that laid out the facts without melodrama. That explained the embezzlement scheme, the shell companies, the manufactured confrontation. That positioned me not as a victim, but as someone who discovered fraud and taken appropriate action. I sent it to Rosalie for review, then finally allowed myself to lie down. Sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Terrence's face when he'd said it was easy. Saw Kelsey smirk when she'd called me a nobody. Saw the comments on the video calling me cruel, vindictive, unstable. At 3 a.m, I got up and went to the window. The city was quieter now, just the occasional car passing below, the glow of streetlights reflecting off wet pavement. I thought about my father, about the day he'd sat me down 18 years ago and told me he was sick, that the company would be mine, that he trusted me to build on what he'd started. Don't let anyone make you small, he'd said. Don't let anyone tell you that you're too much or not enough. You're exactly right. Remember that. I had forgotten. Somewhere along the way, I'd let myself become smaller. Let Terrence take up more space. Let the company I'd built become the company he ran while I stood in the background, grateful to be included in decisions about my own business. Tomorrow I'd take that space back. My phone lit up with a notification. An email from Rosalie sent at 3:17 a.m. Statement is strong. Don't change a word. Board meeting is set for 8 a.m. Press conference at 2 p.m. You're going to do great. Get some sleep if you can. I couldn't, but I tried. By the time the sun rose over Seattle, I was already dressed, already reviewing my notes, already preparing for what came next. The board meeting was exactly as Rosalie had predicted. I presented the forensic audit, showed the transaction records, walked them through the shell company structure. The directors asked questions, good questions, detailed questions, and I answered everyone. When I finished, the vote to remove Terrence as CEO and freeze his access was unanimous. The vote to eliminate the client relations department and terminate Kelsey Sterling was also unanimous. The vote to authorize civil litigation to recover the embezzled funds passed 8-1. The single dissenting vote from a director who'd been Terrence's college roommate and who abstained rather than vote against him. By 10 a.m., Terrence had been informed of the board's decision. By 11, Kelsey had been escorted from the building by security. By noon, the lawsuits had been filed and were part of the public record. And at 2 p.m., I walked into a conference room filled with reporters, cameras, and the knowledge that whatever I said next would define how this story was told. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, and I began. Thank you all for coming. My name is Zoe Mercer, and I'm the board chair and majority shareholder of Continental Logistics Corporation. I'm here today to provide clarity on a situation that has been misrepresented in recent media coverage. Yesterday morning, I returned to Seattle after 18 months in Singapore, where I'd been restructuring our Pacific operations. I arrived at Continental's headquarters at approximately 7:30 a.m. before most employees had arrived for the day. In the lobby, I witnessed an individual verbally abusing security staff and threatening employees. When I intervened, that individual, Kelsey Sterling, who held a position as Director of Client Relations, recorded our interaction. That recording was then edited and posted to social media with a caption that misrepresented the circumstances. What the video didn't show was Ms. Sterling claiming special privileges based on her claimed engagement to my husband, Terrence Mercer, who served as CEO during my absence. What it didn't show was her threatening employees with termination. What it didn't show was the context that led to our confrontation. Since that video was posted, I have been characterized as an entitled corporate executive who verbally assaulted a junior employee. I want to address that characterization directly. It is false. But more importantly, I want to address why that video was created in the first place. Over the past several weeks, I became aware of financial irregularities in Continental's operations. I commissioned a forensic audit, which was completed while I was in flight from Singapore. That audit revealed a coordinated embezzlement scheme totaling approximately $3.2 million. The scheme involved the creation of a false department, client relations, and the routing of corporate funds through a network of shell companies, all of which ultimately trace back to a holding company co-owned by Kelsey Sterling and Terrence Mercer. The confrontation in the lobby yesterday was not a spontaneous incident. It was a calculated attempt to discredit me in advance of my discovery of the fraud. The video was designed to establish a narrative in which I could be portrayed as unstable, aggressive, and vindictive, making it easier to dismiss any allegations I might bring forward. This morning, Continental's board of directors voted unanimously to remove Terrence Mercer as CEO and to eliminate the fraudulent client relations department. Civil lawsuits have been filed to recover the embezzled funds. Additional legal action may follow as the investigation continues. I am sharing this information not to shame anyone or to seek sympathy, but because I believe in transparency. Continental Logistics was built on integrity and trust. Those values were violated, and I have a responsibility to the company's employees, shareholders, and clients to address that violation directly. I will not be taking questions at this time, as the matter is now subject to litigation, but I wanted to provide this context so that the truth could be part of the public record, not just the edited version designed to serve a particular narrative. Thank you. I stepped back from the podium. The room erupted, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, but I had said what I needed to say. Rosalie appeared at my elbow, guiding me toward a side door. We left the conference room and found ourselves in a quiet hallway. That was perfect, she said. Exactly right. Now what? Now we wait. The story will spread. People will pick sides. But you've put the truth out there. The rest is up to them. We made our way to the parking garage. Rosalie's car was waiting, her driver standing beside it. Where do you want to go? She asked. Home, I said. Then corrected myself. The house, I need to get my things. The house Terrence and I had shared was in Madison Park, a quiet neighborhood overlooking Lake Washington. It was a beautiful property. 4 bedrooms, extensive gardens, a private dock. We'd bought it together 7 years ago, back when I'd still believed in the future we were building. I'd been dreading this moment, walking into that space, knowing everything that had happened there while I was gone. All the lies told, all the plans made. But when Rosalie's driver pulled up to the gate, when I walked through the front door, what I felt wasn't grief or anger. It was nothing. The house was just rooms, just furniture and art and carefully chosen colors. It had never really been home. It had been a performance of what home was supposed to look like. I went upstairs to the master bedroom, started pulling clothes from the closet, personal items from drawers. I didn't take everything, just what I needed, what actually mattered to me. In the back of my nightstand, I found a photograph. My father and me, taken the day I'd graduated from business school. He was smiling, his arm around my shoulders, pride evident in every line of his face. I pocketed the photograph and kept packing. I was loading the last box into Rosalie's car when a vehicle pulled into the driveway. Terrence's car. He got out slowly, looking exhausted, defeated. He saw me and Rosalie in the boxes, and something in his expression crumbled. Zoe, he said, please, can we just talk? No, I said simply. Everything I said yesterday was true. I made mistakes, but I never meant for any of this to happen. The shell companies, that was Kelsey's idea. I went along with it. I know I did. But you never wanted to get caught, I said. That's different from never wanting to do it. That's not fair. You stole from me, Terrence. You slept with someone else. You tried to turn my own company against me. And when I discovered what you'd done, you lied about the amount. You tried to minimize it. You asked me to come home and pretend none of it had happened. I was trying to protect you. From what? From the truth? From the consequences of your choices? I closed the car trunk. I don't need your protection. I never did. What I needed was a partner. Someone who actually believed in what we were building together, not someone who saw my absence as an opportunity. I do believe in us. There is no us anymore. There's just legal proceedings and financial settlements and the story that people will tell. about what happened here, and I'm done caring about your version of that story. I got into the car. Rosalie was already in the driver's seat. Terrence put his hand on the window. I'm sorry, I know you don't believe me, but I am. I'm so sorry. I looked at him through the glass, saw the man I'd married, or the ghost of him anyway. The person I'd thought he was had never really existed, just my interpretation of his actions, my generous reading of his intentions. I believe you're sorry, I said. I just don't care anymore. Rosalie started the car. We drove away, leaving Terrence standing in the driveway of a house that would soon be sold as part of the divorce settlement. Where to? Rosalie asked. The hotel. I need to figure out what comes next. What does come next? I thought about that. About the company I'd have to rebuild, the trust I'd have to restore, the narrative I'd have to manage, about the anger that still lived in my chest, sharp and clear and useful. I go back to work, I said. I fix what they broke. I make sure everyone knows that Continental Logistics is mine, that it always was, and that I'm not going anywhere. And personally? Personally, I learned to stop making myself smaller for men who were never big enough to deserve it. Rosalie smiled. That sounds like a good plan. But it wasn't a plan, not really, because I didn't know yet what the fallout would be. Didn't know how the media would respond to my press conference, how employees would react, whether clients would stay or leave. All I knew was that I'd told the truth, and that whatever came next, I'd face it as myself, not as someone's wife, not as someone's victim, not as the villain in their carefully constructed story. Just Zoe. Just me. The hotel room felt smaller when I returned to it. All my carefully maintained distance, all my years of letting other people define the terms of my life, it had led to this. A hotel room, a carry-on bag, and the ruins of everything I'd thought was solid. But ruins could be built on. Foundations could be laid again. I opened my laptop and started composing an email to Continental's employees. Something honest. Something that acknowledged the chaos without apologizing for addressing it. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. This isn't over. You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll make sure everyone knows what you really are. Kelsey. Still fighting. Still trying to control the narrative. I blocked the number and kept writing. The employee email went out at 6 p.m. By 7, I'd received responses from dozens of staff members, some supportive, some uncertain, some clearly waiting to see which way the wind would blow. I answered each one personally, thanked them for their continued work, assured them that Continental's mission hadn't changed even if leadership had. At 8, Rosalie called. The press conference is making waves, she said. Faster than I expected. The story's been picked up nationally. Financial news, business sections, even some political commentary. What are they saying? Mixed. Some outlets are framing it as corporate corruption exposed. Others are still running the original narrative about the scorned wife. A few are trying to both sides it, presenting your evidence while also noting that you have a vested interest in discrediting your husband. Of course they are. But the forensic audit is solid. The shell companies are documented. The more people dig into the actual facts, the harder it becomes to maintain that you're just being vindictive. Facts have a way of winning eventually. Eventually, I repeated. Eventually, she confirmed. In the meantime, prepare for it to get uglier before it gets better. Terrence has hired his own PR firm. So has Kelsey. They're going to fight back. Let them. You sure? Because they're going to attack your credibility, your mental state, your fitness to run the company. They're going to find every difficult decision you've ever made and reframe it as evidence of instability. I'm sure. Okay then, get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be another long day. But rest didn't come. Instead, I lay in the dark and thought about everything that had led to this moment. Every choice I'd made, every compromise I'd accepted, every time I'd told myself that partnership meant yielding, that love meant trust, that marriage meant letting someone else take the lead. I'd been so careful to be fair, to be reasonable, to not be the demanding wife, the controlling boss, the difficult woman, and all that careful fairness had gotten me exactly nowhere. At 3 a.m., unable to sleep, I got up and turned on the television, found a business news channel running a panel discussion about my press conference. Question of whether she's overreacting, one panelist was saying. Obviously, embezzlement is serious, but to publicly destroy her husband's career, to eliminate jobs to create this spectacle, it suggests someone who's more interested in revenge than in justice. But she has documentation, another panelist countered. The forensic audit is public record now. The shell companies are real. Are you suggesting she should have just quietly covered it up to avoid looking vindictive? I'm suggesting there are ways to handle these situations privately. When has a woman ever handled something privately and been believed? The only reason we're even discussing this is because she presented evidence. If she'd just accused him quietly, we'd be having a different conversation about how she couldn't prove it. I turned off the television. They could argue about my motivations all they wanted. The facts remain the facts. My phone lit up with a notification, an email from someone named Diego Fairley, a name I recognized from the business journalism world. The subject line read, "Interview request, your perspective on corporate ethics." I opened it. Ms. Mercer, I'm working on a piece about corporate governance and the challenges of addressing internal fraud when personal relationships are involved. I'd like to include your perspective, if you're willing to speak on the record. I'm particularly interested in your decision to go public rather than handle this through private settlements. Please let me know if you'd be available for a conversation. I forwarded it to Rosalie with a note. Thoughts? Her response came within minutes. Do it. He's respected, thorough, and fair. This could be good for you. So I replied to Diego, agreeing to a phone interview the next afternoon. By dawn, I'd received 17 more interview requests, 6 requests for comment from legal publications, and 1 message from a literary agent asking if I'd be interested in writing a book about the experience. I ignored most of them, answered the ones from outlets I respected, and started preparing for the interview with Diego. He called exactly on time, 2 p.m. the next day. Ms. Mercer, thank you for making time. Call me Zoe. Zoe, then. I want to start by asking why you chose to handle this publicly. You're a private person by all accounts. This can't be comfortable. It's not, I said. But the alternative was letting a false narrative define me. When that video was posted, I became a symbol. Angry wife, corporate bully, woman who can't handle her husband moving on. None of that was true, but it was spreading faster than I could counter it through private channels. So the press conference was about controlling the narrative? It was about introducing facts into a conversation that had become entirely about perception. Yes, I'm angry. Yes, I removed my husband from his position. But those responses are proportional to what actually happened. Systematic embezzlement, not just an affair. Do you think you would have been believed if you hadn't had the forensic audit? If it had just been your word. Against his? I thought about that. Honestly, probably not. There's a reason we're taught to collect evidence before making accusations. Women especially are taught that our perceptions can't be trusted, that we're too emotional, too reactive. The audit wasn't just about proving fraud. It was about proving I wasn't crazy. That's a damning statement about how we evaluate women's credibility. It's a realistic one. Diego asked more questions about the company, about my marriage, about what I plan to do next. I answered honestly, without dramatics, focusing on facts and decisions rather than feelings and betrayals. When we finished, he thanked me and said the piece would run in the next day's paper. One more thing, he said, off the record. You're handling this with remarkable composure. How are you actually doing? I appreciated the question. I'm angry, I said. Every single day. But I'm also clear. For the first time in years, I know exactly where I stand and what I'm fighting for. That clarity is worth something. It sounds like it's worth a lot. The interview ran the next morning on the front page of the business section. The headline, Continental Logistics CEO Scandal. highlights corporate governance gaps and gender dynamics in crisis management. The article was fair. It laid out the facts, included quotes from both my press conference and from Terrence's PR firm, which maintained that I was exaggerating the financial irregularities and that his relationship with Kelsey had been consensual and unrelated to her employment. But it also included expert commentary on embezzlement schemes, on the difficulty of prosecuting white-collar crime when spouses are involved, and on the impossible position I'd been placed in. Within hours, the conversation started to shift. Not entirely. There were still plenty of people convinced I was a vindictive harpy, using my power to destroy a man who'd simply made a mistake. But now there were other voices. 2. People asking why Kelsey had been given a director position without proper vetting. People questioning how $3.2 million could be embezzled without better oversight. People noting that if the genders had been reversed, if a male CEO had discovered his wife stealing from the company, no one would be questioning his decision to take action. I didn't read all the commentary, couldn't without going insane, but I read enough to know that the narrative was evolving, becoming more complicated, harder to reduce to a simple story about a bitter divorce. On the 4th day after the press conference, I went back to the office. I'd coordinated with Rosalie and with the board to make it an official return, an all-hands meeting where I would address the staff directly, answer questions, and begin the process of rebuilding trust. The conference room where we'd held board meetings was packed. Employees from every department, some standing because there weren't enough chairs, all of them, watching me with varying degrees of curiosity, concern, and judgment. I stood at the front of the room and looked out at them. Recognized faces I'd known for years, saw new faces that had been hired during my absence. These were the people who kept Continental running, who loaded trucks and negotiated contracts and managed logistics networks that spanned continents. They deserved better than what had happened. "Thank you all for being here," I began. "I know the past week has been chaotic and concerning. I want to address that directly. When I left for Singapore 18 months ago, I believed I was leaving the company in capable hands. I believed I could trust the person I'd made CEO to maintain Continental's values and integrity. I was wrong. The embezzlement scheme that's been documented in the media and in the lawsuits we've filed represents a fundamental betrayal of those values. It wasn't just about money, though the amount is significant. It was about using company resources for personal gain. It was about creating false positions and false contracts to justify theft. I take responsibility for not catching this sooner, for trusting without verifying, for assuming that the systems we had in place were sufficient. But I want to be clear about what happens now. Continental Logistics is not defined by one person's corruption. It's defined by the work you do every day, by the relationships we've built with clients, by the reliability and integrity that has been our foundation for 30 years. We're going to implement new oversight systems. We're going to audit every department and every contract. We're going to rebuild the trust that was damaged, and we're going to do it together. I'm not going to pretend this is easy or comfortable. Some of you are probably wondering if you can trust me. Some of you are probably waiting to see if I'm actually capable of leading through this. That's fair. I haven't been present for 18 months. I'm asking you to give me the chance to be present now. I'll be taking questions, but I want to establish one boundary. I won't discuss the details of the lawsuits or of my personal situation beyond what's already public. What I will discuss is how we move forward as a company. I stopped, waited. The room was utterly silent. Then a hand went up. A woman from operations, someone I'd worked with for years. "Are we going to lose clients over this?" she asked. "Possibly," I said. "Some clients may decide they can't work with a company in transition, but I believe most will stay because they work with us based on our performance, not our internal drama. And I'm going to personally reach out to every major client to reassure them that Continental's commitment to service hasn't changed." Another hand. A younger employee from IT. "Is it true that the client relations department was completely fake?" The department itself was real in that it existed on paper and people collected paychecks. But its function, the supposed services it provided, Those were fabricated to justify the expense. No actual client relations work was being done. More hands, more questions. Some hostile, some curious, some genuinely concerned about the company's future. I answered all of them, honestly, without deflecting or minimizing. By the end of the hour, the tension in the room had shifted. Not dissolved, there was still too much uncertainty for that. But it had become something more like cautious engagement, a willingness to see what came next. As people filed out, a few approached me individually, offered quiet words of support, shared their own experiences with the chaos of the past week. One woman, an operations manager named Carmen Latham, pulled me aside. "I'm glad you're back," she said. "And I'm glad you didn't just let this slide. A lot of us knew something was off. The way resources were being allocated, the way certain people were getting preferential treatment. But we didn't know how to report it without it looking like personal grievances or office politics." "Why didn't you come to me?" I asked. "You were on another continent, and the culture here had shifted to—" She paused, choosing words carefully. "To the idea that questioning leadership was the same as being difficult, that raising concerns meant you weren't a team player." I felt something cold settle in my chest. "That's not the culture I want." "I know. That's why I'm glad you're back? Because we need someone who actually wants to hear uncomfortable truths." After she left, I sat alone in the conference room for a while, thinking about all the ways control had slipped away without me noticing, all the small shifts that had accumulated into a completely different company culture. Rebuilding that was going to take more than press conferences and lawsuits. It was going to take time, attention, a willingness to actually listen to the people who'd been here all along. I made a note to schedule regular town halls, to create anonymous reporting channels, to restructure the feedback system so that concerns could be raised without fear of retaliation. Then I went to my office, the corner office that had been mine, that Terrence had apparently been using during my absence, and started the work of reclaiming it. The space had been completely redecorated. The cool blues I'd chosen were gone, replaced by earth tones and heavy wood furniture. My art had been removed and stored, replaced by corporate motivational posters that made my skin crawl. I spent the afternoon putting it back the way it had been, returning my art to the walls, moving furniture, creating a space that felt like mine again. As the sun set over the city, my phone rang. "Rosalie, the settlement offers are in," she said. "Already? Terrence's lawyers want to negotiate. They're proposing a lump sum repayment of the embezzled funds plus interest, a signed confession regarding the fraud, and a complete release of all corporate claims in exchange for reducing the criminal exposure. And Kelsey? Her lawyers want severance, a non-disparagement agreement, and a sealed settlement. They're threatening to countersue for wrongful termination and reputational damage. Let them try." That's what I told them. I could hear the smile in Rosalie's voice. "But Zoe, the settlement numbers are actually quite good. Terrence's offer would make you whole financially. You'd recover everything that was taken. And avoiding a criminal trial means less media circus, less ongoing drama. What's the cost? You'd have to agree not to pursue criminal charges. The civil suits would be settled and sealed. Everything becomes private again." I thought about that, about the appeal of privacy, of being able to move forward without the constant media attention, without every decision being analyzed and judged. "What about accountability?" I asked. He'd lose his position, lose his reputation, and pay back everything plus penalties. That's significant accountability. But no one would know. The fraud would be sealed. The confession would be private. And in 5 years, he could be working somewhere else, running some other company with no public record of what he did. Possibly yes. Then no. Counter with this: full criminal prosecution, unsealed settlements, and public disclosure of all findings. I'll accept the repayment, but I won't help him hide what he did." Rosalie was quiet for a moment. "You're sure? Because that means months more of this. Depositions, trial proceedings, media coverage. Your life won't be private again." "My life hasn't been private since Kelsey posted that video. The only difference is whether the final record shows the truth or shows whatever version they managed to negotiate. Okay, I'll counter. But Zoe, prepare yourself. If we go to trial, they're going to make it ugly. They're going to put your marriage on display, your business decisions, everything. There won't be any part of your life that doesn't get examined. Good, I said. Let them look. Let everyone look. I'm done hiding. After I hung up, I sat in my reclaimed office and watched the city lights come on below. Thought about what the next months would bring. The testimony, the cross-examination, the careful dissection of every choice I'd made. I should have felt anxious, dreading it. Instead, I felt ready. The trial date was set for 6 months out. In the meantime, life continued in that strange, suspended way that major crises create. I ran the company, attended board meetings, rebuilt relationships with clients and employees, and every few weeks, there would be a development in the case. A motion filed, a deposition scheduled, a leak to the media that required managing. Terrence's strategy became clear early on. He was going to position himself as a man who'd made mistakes in his personal life, but who hadn't intended to commit fraud. The shell companies were Kelsey's idea. He'd gone along with it because he was in love, because he wasn't thinking clearly, because he'd let his judgment be clouded. Kelsey's strategy was different. She was the victim, groomed by an older, more powerful man, manipulated into participating in a scheme she didn't fully understand, destroyed by a vindictive wife who couldn't accept that her husband had moved on. Both strategies relied on me being either too angry to be credible or too controlled to be sympathetic. I refused to be either. In my depositions, I was calm, factual. I walked through the timeline without embellishment, presented the evidence without editorial, let the documents speak for themselves. And when their lawyers tried to bait me, asking about my emotional state, my marriage, my mental health, I stayed measured. "Were you angry when you discovered the affair?" Terrence's lawyer asked. "I was disappointed," I said. Anger came later, when I realized the affair was accompanied by fraud. Disappointed that your husband found someone else? Disappointed that I'd misplaced my trust? You must have felt betrayed. I felt clarified. I finally understood behaviors I'd been misinterpreting for years. Clarified, he repeated as if the word itself was suspicious. Yes, betrayal is emotional. Clarity is strategic. I prefer the latter. Rosalie smiled when she heard that exchange later. "You're good at this," she said. "Better than most people who've never been on a witness stand before." "I've been running a company for 15 years, Kian," I said. "I know how to handle hostile questions." But it wasn't just questions. As the trial date approached, the campaign against me intensified. Someone leaked portions of my sealed therapy records from years ago, sessions I'd had after my father died when I was struggling with grief and the pressure of suddenly running a company. The records were taken out of context, used to suggest I had a history of instability and control issues. A former employee, someone I'd fired for performance issues 3 years ago, came forward with allegations that I had created a hostile work environment, that I had been impossible to work for, that my perfectionism bordered on abuse. A business competitor filed an ethics complaint alleging that I'd used inside information during the Singapore restructuring to disadvantage their contracts. None of it stuck. The therapy records were illegally obtained and inadmissible. The former employee's claims were contradicted by documentation of his performance failures. The ethics complaint was dismissed for lack of evidence, but each accusation required time and energy to counter. Each one fed the narrative that I was a difficult woman, someone whose own behavior invited scrutiny. I watched it happen with a kind of detached fascination, the way they tried to make my competence look like aggression, my standards look like abuse, my refusal to accept fraud look like vindictiveness. And I kept working, kept running the company, kept preparing for trial. The night before jury selection, I couldn't sleep. I was in my apartment, a new place I'd bought after the house sold, something smaller and simpler and completely my own. I sat by the window and thought about the next day. about the moment when 12 strangers would be asked to decide what had happened, to evaluate evidence and testimony and determine whose version of reality was closer to the truth. I thought about my father, about the way he'd built this company through recessions and market shifts and competition, about the trust he'd placed in me when he died. "Don't let anyone make you small," he'd said. I hadn't. Not anymore. My phone buzzed. A text from Rosalie. "Early breakfast tomorrow? Final prep?" "Yes, 7 a.m.? Perfect. And Zoe, you're going to do great tomorrow. Just tell the truth. Just tell the truth." As if truth was simple. As if it wasn't complicated. By interpretation and bias, and the 1,000 ways people could hear the same facts and draw different conclusions. But it was all I had. The truth as I understood it. The evidence I'd gathered. The clarity I'd fought for. It would have to be enough. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Terrence testified that he'd been lonely, that Kelsey had pursued him aggressively, that he'd gotten caught up in something he couldn't control. He claimed he hadn't known about the shell companies until it was too late to back out, that Kelsey had managed those arrangements, that he'd been a fool, but not a criminal. Kelsey testified that Terrence had promised to leave me, that he'd said I was emotionally absent and controlling, that he'd encouraged her to create the client relations department as a way to build her career and their future together. She cried on the stand, talked about how she'd believed in him, trusted him, and now felt used by both of us. Their testimonies were designed to split the blame, to make it a complicated story about relationships gone wrong rather than a simple story about theft. But the forensic audit didn't care about relationships. The documents didn't care about who was lonely or who felt used. The shell companies existed. The money had been moved. The signatures on the contracts were real. When I testified, I didn't talk about my marriage. I talked about the company, about the systems we'd had in place for oversight, about how those systems had been circumvented through the creation of a false department with false contracts. "Did you love your husband?" the prosecutor asked. "That's not relevant to whether he committed fraud," I said. "But it's relevant to your state of mind, to whether you were thinking clearly when you made these accusations." I made accusations based on evidence, not emotions. My state of mind was focused on protecting the company. "You weren't hurt by the affair?" "I was disappointed by the fraud. The affair was just context." The jury deliberated for 2 days. When they came back, the verdict was clear. Guilty on all counts of embezzlement, guilty on all counts of fraud, guilty on conspiracy charges. Terrence received a sentence of 6 years in federal prison. Kelsey received 4 years. Both were ordered to make full restitution plus penalties. I sat in the courtroom and felt nothing. No triumph, no vindication, just exhaustion and the awareness that this chapter was finally closing. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I made a brief statement, thanked the prosecution team, and confirmed that Continental would be implementing new oversight measures to prevent similar fraud in the future. Then I went back to the office and got to work. The months after the trial were strange. The media attention gradually faded. The social media discourse moved on to other scandals, and I was left with the company and the work of actually rebuilding. Some clients had left during the trial. Others had stayed. We had to restructure departments, hire new leadership, implement the oversight systems I'd promised. It was exhausting, consuming, exactly what I needed. A year after the trial, I was sitting in my office when Carmen Latham knocked on the door. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. "Of course." She came in, sat down, looked uncharacteristically nervous. "I wanted to talk to you about something," she said, "about company culture." "Go ahead." "I've been here almost 12 years. I've watched the company change and change back, and I've noticed something. When your father ran things, people felt safe to speak up. When you first took over, that continued, but somewhere in the middle, before Terrence even, that started to shift. People got quieter, more cautious. Why? Because perfection became the expectation. Not excellence, but perfection. And when people are afraid to make mistakes, they stop taking risks. They stop innovating. I thought about that. You're saying I created that culture? I'm saying we all created it. But yes, some of it came from the top, from the way you responded to setbacks, from the standards you set. She paused. I'm not criticizing. I think we have an opportunity now to be intentional about what we rebuild, to create something better than what was there before. What does better look like? Honest, trusting, a place where people can raise concerns without fear, where mistakes are learning opportunities, not career enders, where the focus is on serving clients well, not on impressing leadership. I nodded slowly. That's fair, and it's important. I looked at her directly. Will you help me build that? Will you tell me when I'm slipping back into old patterns? If you'll actually listen. I will, I promise. She smiled. Then yes, I'll help. After she left, I sat alone and thought about what she'd said, about the ways I'd contributed to a culture that made people afraid, about the difference between standards and perfectionism, between leadership and control. I'd spent so much time fighting Terrence's corruption that I hadn't examined my own failures, the ways I'd made the company less than it could be, even before he'd started stealing from it. That was the real work, I realized, not just recovering the money or implementing new systems, but creating an environment where theft couldn't happen because people felt safe to question, to push back, to say when something didn't feel right. 2 years after the trial, Continental was stable again. Revenue was growing. Client relationships were solid. The new oversight systems were working. And I was different too. Not softer exactly. Not more forgiving, but more aware. More willing to interrogate my own assumptions. More interested in building something sustainable than in being right. I'd started dating someone, a project manager, from a company we partnered with on West Coast logistics. Someone who'd known about the scandal, but didn't define me by it. Someone who challenged me and made me laugh and didn't need me to be anyone other than who I actually was. His name was Rowan Quincy, and he was kind in ways I hadn't expected to value. Patient, curious, entirely unimpressed by my money or my position. You're terrifying, he'd said on our second date, grinning to show he meant it as a compliment. I know. I like it. Most people try to make themselves smaller around me. You just are. It's refreshing. I'd thought about that for days afterward. The way he'd said, just are, like it was simple, like being myself was enough. 3 years after the trial, I was invited to speak at a business ethics conference. They wanted me to talk about corporate governance, about fraud prevention, about the importance of oversight. I almost declined. The idea of being held up as some kind of example felt wrong. I hadn't been noble. I'd just refused to accept theft. But then I thought about all the people who might be in situations similar to what I'd faced, who might be seeing warning signs and dismissing them, who might be making themselves small to avoid conflict. I accepted the invitation. The conference was in Chicago. The ballroom was packed. Hundreds of executives, all of them there to hear about best practices and risk management. I walked onto the stage and looked out at them, saw my own former self in their faces, the confidence, the certainty, the assumption that their systems would catch problems before they became crises. Thank you for having me, I began. I'm going to tell you about the worst professional experience of my life and what I learned from it. But I'm not going to tell it as a cautionary tale about trusting the wrong person. I'm going to tell it as a story about trusting the wrong things. I trusted systems instead of instincts. I trusted titles instead of character. I trusted the idea that partnership meant yielding, that delegation meant distance, that trust meant not asking questions. And all of that trust created space for someone to steal from me, not just money, but time and credibility in the company I'd built. I walked them through it. The Singapore assignment, the gradual awareness, the forensic audit, the decision to go public. People ask me if I regret that decision, I said, if I wish I'd handled it quietly. And the answer is no, because quiet settlements protect the wrong people. They allow fraud to be repositioned as a private matter. They let corruption hide behind confidentiality agreements. But more than that, going public forced me to confront my own complicity, The ways I'd made the company vulnerable by creating a culture where people were afraid to question leadership. The ways I'd prioritized appearing in control over actually being informed. The real lesson isn't that you need better oversight systems, though you do. It's that you need to create environments where people feel safe to tell you uncomfortable truths, where questioning doesn't equal disloyalty, where raising concerns is rewarded, not punished. Because fraud doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in cultures that punish honesty and reward silence. I finished speaking to complete silence. Then someone started clapping. Then another person. Then the entire room was on their feet. I stood there and felt the weight of it. The way my pain had become useful. The way my anger had become productive. Afterward, dozens of people came up to me, shared their own stories of fraud discovered or prevented, asked for advice, thanked me for my honesty. One woman, probably in her 50s, pulled me aside. "I'm the CFO of a mid-sized tech company," she said, "and I've been seeing irregularities in our procurement department for months. But our CEO is the one who created that department, and I've been afraid to say anything because I don't want to seem like I'm undermining him." "What do the irregularities look like?" I asked. She described a pattern eerily similar to what I discovered at Continental. Inflated contracts, unnecessary consultants, vendors that couldn't be verified. "You know what you need to do," I said. "I know, but I'm afraid." "Fear is information," I told her. "It's telling you that something is wrong. Listen to it." She nodded. "Thank you for making it possible to have this conversation." After she left, I stood in the empty conference hall and thought about all the conversations I'd been unable to have, all the years I'd swallowed my concerns, dismissed my instincts, made myself small. No more. 5 years after the trial, I was sitting in my office when Rosalie called. "Terrence is up for parole," she said. I had known this was coming. He'd served most of his sentence, been a model prisoner, participated in every program available to him. "What are the chances he gets it?" I asked. "Good. He's expressed remorse, taken responsibility, completed educational courses on ethics and financial management. The parole board tends to look favorably on white-collar criminals who show rehabilitation." "Do I need to do anything?" "You can submit a victim impact statement. Talk about how the fraud affected you and the company. It might influence the decision." I thought about that. About whether I had anything left to say to Terrence or about him. "No," I said finally. "I don't need to speak at his parole hearing. He served his time. What he does next is his business." "You're sure? This might be your last chance to..." "To what? Punish him more? I'm done punishing him, Rosalie. I'm done thinking about him at all." She was quiet for a moment. "That's growth. That's exhaustion. Maybe both." After we hung up, I sat in my office and thought about Terrence, about the man I'd married and the criminal he'd become, about whether there was any reconciling those two people or whether they'd always been the same and I'd just been unwilling to see it. I didn't know. And I was okay with not knowing. What I did know was this. He'd taught me what I didn't want, had shown me through his worst choices what I actually valued. Honesty over harmony, clarity over comfort, truth over peace. Those lessons had cost me my marriage and 3 years of chaos. But they'd given me back myself. That seemed like a fair trade. Terrence got parole. I heard about it through the news, not from Rosalie or anyone else. He released a statement thanking the parole board, expressing remorse for his actions and committing to rebuilding his life with integrity. I didn't read the whole thing. Didn't need to. Kelsey got out 6 months later. She immediately sold her story to a true crime podcast, positioning herself as a victim of manipulation and corporate vindictiveness. The podcast was popular from what I heard. Lots of people sympathized with her version of events. I didn't listen to it. Didn't care. Let her have her narrative. I had reality. 6 years after the trial, Continental Logistics was the strongest it had ever been. We'd expanded into new markets, developed new services, built a reputation for ethical operations and transparent governance. And I was proud of it in a way I'd never been before. because this time I'd built it while staying myself, without compromising, without yielding, without making myself small. I was in a board meeting when my phone buzzed with a message from Carmen. Congratulations! Fortune just named you one of the top 50 most powerful women in business. The profile is incredibly complimentary. They called you a model of ethical leadership who transformed personal crisis into corporate renewal. I read the message twice. Felt something complicated in my chest. Pride, yes, but also awareness of how incomplete that story was. How it made everything sound intentional and noble when so much of it had just been survival. But maybe that was okay. Maybe survival was noble. Maybe refusing to be destroyed was its own kind of power. I texted back, "Thank you for telling me. Let's celebrate with the team. They're the ones who actually made this possible." "Already planning it," she responded. "And Zoe, you earned this, all of it." After the meeting ended, I went back to my office and pulled up the Fortune profile. Read through their description of what had happened, the fraud, the trial, the rebuilding. They'd framed it as a story about resilience, about a woman who'd faced betrayal and come out stronger. They weren't wrong, but they weren't entirely right either. Because the story wasn't about resilience. It was about rage, about the decision to stop accepting unacceptable things, about the moment when I'd chosen to be impossible to ignore rather than easy to forget. That was the truth they couldn't print, that sometimes the only way forward was through anger, through the willingness to be difficult, to make noise, to refuse reconciliation and demand accountability instead. I'd been taught my whole life that anger was unproductive, that it made women look unstable, hysterical, out of control. But my anger had saved me, had given me the clarity to see what was actually happening, had fueled me through months of litigation and public scrutiny, had refused to let me settle for a quiet exit and a sealed settlement. My anger had been the most productive emotion I'd ever felt. I closed the article and looked out at the city, the same view I'd had that first morning when I'd returned to find everything changed. But now it looked different, familiar in a new way. This was my city, my company, my life, and I'd fought for every inch of it. My phone rang. Rowan. "Hey," he said. "I saw the Fortune profile. You're officially terrifying now." "Professionally recognized terrifying." I laughed. "I was terrifying before." "True, but now you have a plaque. Want to get dinner to celebrate?" "I have evening meetings until 7. Wait. You don't have to." "I want to. I want to celebrate with you. This is a big deal, Zoe." I felt something warm in my chest. The simple pleasure of someone being proud of me without needing anything from me in return. "Okay," I said. 7:30. The place near your apartment?" "Perfect. I love you, by the way." "I know." He laughed and hung up. I sat there for a moment longer, the phone still in my hand, and let myself feel it. The success, the recognition, the life I'd rebuilt from ruins, and the knowledge that I'd done it without forgiveness, without reconciliation, without making peace with what had been done to me. I'd done it angry. I'd done it difficult. I'd done it impossible to ignore. And that, more than any Fortune profile or board seat or revenue growth, felt like victory. The evening meetings were routine. Budget reviews, strategic planning, the ordinary machinery of running a company. But I was present for them in a way I hadn't been in years. Asking questions, pushing back, making sure I understood not just what was being proposed, but why. No more trusting without verifying. No more assuming everyone had the company's best interests at heart. Trust, I'd learned, wasn't given. It was earned and proven and constantly reevaluated. At 7:15, I wrapped the last meeting and headed out, stopped by Carmen's desk on the way. "Good night," I said, "and thank you again for the heads up about Fortune." "Anytime." "And Zoe?" She looked up from her computer. "I'm really glad you came back that morning, that you didn't just handle everything from Singapore and stay away." "Why?" Because we needed to see that you were willing to fight. Not just for yourself, but for what this place is supposed to be." She smiled. It mattered. It still matters. I nodded, feeling the weight of that, the way my choices had rippled outward, affecting people I'd never even spoken to. "I'll remember that," I said. The restaurant where I met. Rowan was small, intimate, the kind of place where you could actually have a conversation without shouting. He was already there when I arrived, a glass of wine waiting for me at the table. "To the most powerful woman I know," he said, raising his glass. "I'm not the most powerful woman you know," I said. "Your sister runs a hospital." "Okay, to one of the most powerful women I know, and definitely the most terrifying." I laughed and clinked my glass against his. We ordered food, talked about his day, about my meetings, about mundane things that had nothing to do with fraud or trials or fortune profiles. And somewhere in the middle of the evening, I realized something. I was happy. Not ecstatic, not transformed, not healed. Just quietly, sustainably happy. It was a strange feeling. Unfamiliar. I'd spent so many years in crisis mode and survival mode, in the mode of constantly proving myself. That simple contentment felt almost suspicious. "What?" Rowan asked, noticing my expression. "Nothing. Just realizing I'm happy." "That's a good realization." "It feels fragile." "Most good things do." He reached across the table, took my hand. "But that doesn't make them less real." I looked at our joined hands. Thought about the last time someone had held my hand like this. Terrence in the conference room asking me to come home, asking me to pretend. This was different. Rowan knew exactly who I was. Difficult and demanding and angry and unforgiving. And he was here anyway. "Thank you," I said. "For what?" "For not needing me to be anyone else." He squeezed my hand. "I like who you are. Even the terrifying parts. Especially the terrifying parts." We finished dinner, walked back to his apartment, spent the night talking and laughing and being together in that easy way that still felt remarkable to me. And in the morning, I woke up and went back to work, back to the company, back to the meetings, back to the endless process of building something that mattered. But I carried the happiness with me, let it exist alongside the anger, the wariness, the hard-won clarity, because that's what I'd learned in the end. You don't have to choose between rage and joy, between vigilance and contentment, between being difficult and being happy. You can be all of it. You can hold all of it at once, and anyone who can't handle that complexity doesn't deserve access to you. 7 years after that morning in the lobby, I stood in the same space. The marble floors gleamed. The Continental logo shone behind the reception desk. But everything else had changed. The security guard was someone new, but he nodded respectfully as I passed. The reception desk was staffed by people who knew my name, who understood the company's values, who took their roles seriously. And in the corridor where I'd once heard Kelsey shouting, there was only the quiet hum of productive work. I stood there for a moment, remembering, not with pain, but with recognition. This was where it had started, where I'd been confronted with the truth about my life and had made the choice to face it rather than hide from it. That choice had cost me everything I thought I wanted and had given me everything I actually needed. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Board meeting in 15 minutes. I took the elevator up to the 14th floor, walked through the familiar space to the conference room, sat down in my chair at the head of the table and looked around at the faces of the people I'd chosen to help me run this company. People who questioned, who challenged, who told uncomfortable truths, people who made Continental better. "Let's get started," I said, and we did, because the work was never finished. The vigilance was never over. The process of building something ethical and sustainable was ongoing, but I was done apologizing for it. Done making myself smaller to make others comfortable. Done choosing peace over truth. I was Zoe Mercer. I built this company. I saved this company. And I wasn't going anywhere. That wasn't revenge. That wasn't bitterness. That wasn't even anger anymore. It was just fact. And facts, as I learned, had a way of enduring long after narratives faded.